Ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and call the meeting of the House Budget Fiscal Affairs Oversight Committee to order, and thank everybody for being here today. We're going to hear from Representative Allison on House Bill 33. I don't know if anyone wishes to speak to the bill. We'll certainly allow public comment on the bill. Maybe you can take my notepad and put it at the end of the table if anybody wants to sign in to speak on the measure. We're going to be a bit flexible this afternoon. I know Representative Allison has an important matter to his constituents and district. They have a DOT election going along, so he is subject to being called out of the room at any time. So if we think it'll be a short time that he may need to go away, but we'll just stand at ease, Representative, when that goes. You should have in your packet, and we'll call the representative to present House Bill 33. You should have in your packet LC 189532. Representative, if you want to come to either end there, this is kind of an odd room for presentation and testimony, but we'll make sure we share our microphones around. We have, I have this is the bill you had drafted, right? It's in our packet here.
That is correct.
I have a committee sub drafted that I will hand out to the members that we'll be working from today. More over there? No, we're good. Representative, you have a copy of your committee sub, right?
I do.
Just for the purposes of introducing the substitute, the author of the bill was very helpful, and he and I have added some language we think will be helpful to the zero-based budget, and we'll get into that in Section 2. But you will see some difference, and I'll yield to Representative Adams for the presentation of the bill. You should have the handout now. LC 14040S is our substitute that we'll be working from today. And Representative, if you want to tell us about your measure and
yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Today I sit before you to introduce House Bill 33. Many of you have known that last year we passed a zero-based budget out of both the House and the Senate. It was overridden by the governor, and the Senate decided to override the veto of SB 1, which was presented last year. There was a fundamental flaw with that bill, in that the date that was on that bill would have required our governor to be in non-compliance and our budget office to have to redo the complete budget to make it zero-based. That being the case, before that happened, I pre-filed House Bill 33, which was identical to the bill that we submitted last year, which was known as House Bill 4, in last session known as House Bill 44. However, after the veto, I sat down with several key people, including the House Budget Office Director John Brown, several of the analysts. I figured that if we were going to substantially look at a zero-based budgeting bill, we should talk to the folks whose feet are on the ground, the folks who are going to have to do the work and take any suggestions. Mr. Brown and the budget analysts were very kind to me and gave me some good advice, and that is part of the reason for the sub. So, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to start going over the bill with your permission.
Absolutely.
All right. In Part 1, Section 1 of the bill, which starts at line 23 through probably line 38, the major change with this bill is that the original zero-based bill as presented last year and as approved by the Senate has no real direction on which agencies and departments would be zero-based any one year. Both Senate Bill 1 and House Bill 44 from last term session basically said that every 4 years we would look at every departmental agency and every program to make sure that they were zero-based at least once every 4 years. The problem with that is there was no oversight on who was going to decide which agencies and which department. So in talking with John Brown, he came up with a great solution which we brought in here. The legislature has something that's known as the Joint Fiscal Affairs Subcommittee. This is a subcommittee that's made up of 20 members, 10 from the House and 10 from the Senate. 5 of those members are picked by the Speaker of the House, 5 from the Lieutenant Governor, and 10 from the Governor. These folks get together every May and basically look to see if there are any changes that are due with the budget in the last month. What we have decided in this bill is we are going to recommend to the committee in this bill that the Joint Fiscal Affairs Subcommittee would be responsible for deciding which departments and programs would be zero-based budgeted in the next fiscal year. This way, the legislative process can direct to the Governor's Office of OPB exactly which departments and agencies would be zero-based budgeted in the next year. It's a good way for this committee to have oversight over exactly what's going on in the budgeting process. Also, in what we have changed in this bill as well, if I can find this section really quick, starting on line 56, which is section F, we are going to continue to ask that the first department that is overseen is the Department of Education. As all of you know from your service in the General Assembly, the K through 12 education is approximately 47% of the state budget. It is probably the first thing that should be looked at whenever zero-based budgeting is implemented. We have encouraged in this bill that we do that, and we hope that you would agree with that. The Budget Department also had a couple of other changes. One would be, since we do not have any direct control over the judicial branch and how they budget, we want to encourage them very slightly that we would love their budgets to come to our budget office in zero-based budgeting. If you look, I believe that is on line 60, the judicial branch is encouraged to participate in zero-based budgeting. This was also another recommendation from the budgeting department. Finally, in Section 1 of the bill, which I believe is a great idea, is we have placed a legislative sunset on zero-based, which is line 66, Section J. The reason for this is simple. We are going from one type of budgeting to another one, and we want to be able to make sure that if it isn't working the way we want it to work, we can get away from it. If it is working, all that will need to be done is the legislature will come in here and continue to continue zero-based budgeting. It will not be sunset until every program or department has been zero-based at least once. So basically, at the end of the 4-year cycle, the legislature would have to vote to reauthorize the use of zero-based budgeting, and I believe that would give the legislature, whoever it is at that time, which will be in June 30th of 2014, the authority to look back. So that is Section 1 of the bill. It is significantly similar to what we passed, being zero-based, but there are some, I think, good creative solutions that we have worked with the House Budget Office to come up with. Mr. Chairman, if you would like, I can go over Section 2 of the bill.
Yeah, I'll let you.
You want to do that?
Now, Representative, let's do that.
Okay.
If there are questions relative to Part 1 of the legislation.
That's fine.
I guess that last section on the repealing on line 66.
Yes, sir.
That really only leaves one budgeting year.
One budgeting cycle. Yes, it'll be basically the time for all. If according to this bill, basically everything has to be zero-based within 4 years. So, actually, I take that back. I see what you're saying. I believe that date is incorrect. I saw what you said.
Yeah, a couple years out there.
Chairman Hill, I think you're right. I think that date did not get changed as it should have. I just noticed that date of 2014. We may want to consider an amendment to clear up that language. Thank you, Chairman Hill.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Chairman Hill. Can you take that
Okay,
microphone? I think there's strain.
We're passing this. Okay. I apologize, Mr. Chairman. I guess one other question that you'd mentioned there, that this would not sunset until every agency or department had gone through zero-based budgeting, but I don't think I saw that specifically. You'd made that comment. I found the date portion, but I know we went through this briefly, but hello.
I'm on line 30, 31 through 33.
Is that where it said it?
They will require every agency to do it once every 4 years. So if we are open 4 years, every agency will have to do it at least once. It doesn't specifically say that.
Okay. I understand. Thank you very much.
You've got an odd room here. When he's talking, we have to turn that one off. When he's talking, we have to turn that one off.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Representative.
That is correct. Basically, the statute will require that every 4 years, every department be reviewed. And that Joint Fiscal Affairs Subcommittee will be responsible for making sure which agencies do that.
Let me stop there.
Yes.
I know you have a live list on Sheriff, but I think they're also streaming the meeting. So in order for them to get, for us not to look like we're talking.
I'm turned off. You can go ahead and turn on.
Please continue.
Okay, I guess what I was saying, Chairman, I agree with what you're saying, but as Chairman Martin pointed out, this Fiscal Affairs Subcommittee would be required to ensure that every 4 years, every department and program is at least looked at with zero-based budgeting once in that 4-year cycle. I do believe that the date is incorrect on line 66, and we probably need an amendment to clear that up. But the idea was that upon commencement, we would be able to look at everything in a 4-year period, and therefore after that, after every program was looked upon, it would be sunset unless the legislature chose to continue.
Didn't get this microphone thing yet. Again, I guess I'm missing it. I see on lines 32 and 33 where it says we shall not require any agency or program to use it more often than every 4 years, but I still am not reading, and though I'm reading as fast as I can, where it says they're required to do it within the 4 years and before that expires. Maybe I'm just not reading quite fast enough here. Do you like the microphone, Mr. Chairman? Come over and dance.
Yeah, here we go. Maybe we'll get a new room soon. I think perhaps Representative Allison, in an earlier the earlier version, there may have been that requirement that at least a quarter of the agencies would have been done every 4 years. But that's something that we can look forward, because your intent is for every agency to do this once before it's sunset. Is that not true?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I guess in the sub that we have produced that I did not notice, the original language in in the original bill does say that OPB shall determine which program shall submit zero-based budgeting, except that no program shall use zero-based more often than once every 3 years, and each program shall use zero-based budgeting at least once every 4 years. Chairman Hill, I think you're right on this sub. It does not have that language, and it would be my intent that we put that language in.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Do you have any further questions on part one of the legislation? Yes, sir. If you
just a quick question. Being new to the legislature, line 60, the judicial branch is encouraged to participate in the zero-based budgeting process. You alluded to it, but what does that really mean, other than
this was a change that came to us at the request of the budget office. If Mr. Brown could have been here, he went home sick, I would have him address that issue. But it's my understanding that for whatever reason, the judicial branch submits things differently than other branches of the government, and we would want to encourage them to do that zero-based, and that's why it was specifically in there.
I guess it's naive on my part. Then do we set the judicial budget or not?
Yes, I believe we do.
Then why wouldn't they not be required to?
Maybe we can get someone. Budget.
If you would take that microphone, Martha, and the deputy director. Did I get your title right? I should know.
Yeah, Grunt.
Yeah.
The judicial branch, as a separation of power issue, they submit their budget to the governor, who makes no changes. We are the checks and balances for them. We cannot make them conform. We can only encourage them. So it's the three branches separation of powers kind of issue.
Follow up on that. I think the encouraging, I think that's a good word. We'd like them to do that. We're going to get to later in the bill some of the things that the bill suggests to even get a better value for the taxpayers. But providing it in that format is what the House or the Legislative Budget Office should see, so that we would have a consistency among our documentation. But we cannot require them to do that. Did you have anything further?
No, thank you. That answers your question.
You had something.
How many departments are there? Do you know off the top of your head?
I do not know off the top of my head how many departments there are. I could get that information for you.
That'll be good. 70-something? How many?
There's 70-something.
For my days in the program, 70 departments.
But the sub-departments.
76. Okay. So we'll pass it on around.
Oh yeah, we can do that.
We may get a new room.
Yeah, this is
budget goes.
I see that I think I understand the reason for the Department of Education being first, but is there any concern with the, I guess, the funding challenges they're facing right now with putting them early in the process?
I think the theory of zero-based, with being in a economic downturn, I think it's probably, in my opinion, it would be the best time to look at education. It is the largest single chunk of the budget that we deal with, K through 12 education. It would also be the greatest workload. Having each of those broken down by individual school systems and individual school districts, we want to make sure that gets looked at first. I have talked with the House Budget Office and really think I understand the task, but have no idea the workload that would be put on them. But I think if we're going to do this, education being 47% of the budget is probably the best to look at it first.
So I guess there would be an impact to my local schools as well in this, or not really, because they set their own budgets.
What I think is going to happen is that I can get you a breakdown of every single budget unit that has to be looked at by the department. The director of the budget office gave that to me, which I can give to you. I can make sure you get that, so you can see exactly how each one will be incrementally given to them. So I think it just takes the biggest part of the budget and looks at it first. I don't know how it would impact. We would just have to look and see. That would be up, obviously, to the budget offices and the appropriations committee when they got that information. My guess is it would be 10 minutes, but there are 3 candidates and there could be something. I apologize to the committee. I have a DOT vote. So would you like to go over Section 2?
If the committee will allow, and we're certainly not going to move this bill without the authors. I didn't plan to move this today, but let's let Representative Allison tend to that. That's a very important thing. I think Dollar Georgian's the DOT election, so we'll excuse him. And to the extent I work with the representative to create the Part 2 of the bill, I can talk to that in his absence. And I'll do my best to answer questions, and we'll hold our questions on Part 1 directly for the author when he gets back, if that works. I'll go ahead with Part 2 to follow up on your question about education. I don't think zero-based, as it is intended here, is to try to make it hard on a particular department, or necessarily if you're the first person to be zero-based, you're going to lose money. In fact, it may allow you to show where the value that you're providing for the money you're getting, at a detailed level, and might well enhance the first agency that goes zero-based, because one might, as the budget process comes forward, you look at the value we're getting for the money we're spending. So I don't think it's a punishment for the Department of Education to go first. I think the representative probably has a great point in that they are a large percentage of the budget. And as I understand it, Martha, am I correct? We're talking about the State Department of Education. This would not be every county and city municipal school system sending their budget to us in a zero-based format.
Something came up today in an appropriations committee chair's meeting. My committee, which is the zero-based budgeting committee, has been assigned by the chairman the task of working with the Secretary of State's office and the Department of Agriculture, which are both going to attempt to do a zero-based budgeting this coming year. And the intent is to work with them, observe, and see what problems we have and see exactly what it consists of, because we all have it in theory. We don't know what it has in practice. And I think we might want to consider here when we get that kind of a report to bring it back and perhaps consider letting the Joint Fiscal Affairs Subcommittee then set the priorities, because they're going to be the oversight committee. Maybe they might want to set the priorities of which of the departments that they want to do first, because it might be biting off an awful lot to do one of the largest first. You might want to start with some of the smallest, work out the kinks, and then progress. So that's just a thought, but that's something that came up today, that we're going to start working with those 2 departments who are going to attempt zero-based budgeting on their own this year. the 13. Absolutely. Let's learn a little bit before what we're doing before we mandate how we're going to do it in the future. That's what they do at the federal level, but maybe we ought to take little steps and take a little bit of guidance here and allow the people doing the oversight to make some of those decisions.
So my understanding is that, Mr. Chairman, that the Department of Ed would not start off first, would not start off with that group.
Well, I think what Chairman Hill said. What Chairman Hill said, I believe, is regardless of how this legislation comes out, the Department of Agriculture and Secretary of State's office are going to embark on zero-based budgeting. They're going to do it just because those two department heads, if you will, have decided they want to do that for the next fiscal year, for 2013. That's irrespective of if this legislation doesn't pass, they intend to do that. What the Chairman further suggested, I believe, was since they're doing that, we take that into consideration as we identify the first department. And maybe since they're already, that later information, as they say, has come about, that the Secretary of State's office and Department of Agriculture are doing that, and perhaps those two and the Department of Ed would be more than we could handle in terms of doing that. So perhaps the Department of Ed may not be the best first choice. Fair enough?
Let me just ask this.
Yes, sir.
Since it's on my mind. Have a formula that we use to set up the drawdown money. So will this, going with this zero-based budget, would that affect that, the drawdown money for each county? Okay, all right.
The answer to that, Martha was not on the microphone, but the answer to that was no, it would not affect that for those that are listening. Any further questions on Part 1 of the legislation? I'll try to, in Representative Allison's absence, go over Part 2. Tell how much entertainment experience I have based on how I handle a microphone. We'll move on then to Part 2 of the legislation. In Part 2 of the legislation, Section 2.1 is really the operative portion. In looking at what Chairman Hill said and what both of you gentlemen have pointed out, this is a non-trivial process of setting up a new budgeting procedure, zero-based budgeting. Section 2 of the legislation goes and suggests requires the creation of a joint legislative budget office. We used to do that in the legislature a few years ago. Now we have a separate budget offices. We think we will get economics of scale in that, perhaps out of the gate, save upwards of $1 million of merging those. But more than that, and it comes from my previous years as vice chairman of appropriation, working with the chairman down there. If you that have been in the legislature before, one year you get a budget in this format, the next year you get a budget in a different format. The Senate produces one, in a format, the House produces the next one. Zero-based budgeting is to look at what we're spending on a detail level, be able to compare those budgets on an annualized basis, and we just feel like this is a good opportunity to work with our colleagues across the hall in the Senate. The legislation calls for the creation of the Joint Legislative Budget Office. We're not going, suggesting the House is better than the Senate. I mean, we have a good collegial debate about that on everything from, who has the best resolution to who has the best coffee in the morning. We always debate our colleagues in the Senate on that, but this is absolutely not about that. This is about creating value for Georgia and combining two excellent staffs under one director, that director being selected by the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House, just like the Joint Redistricting Office is done now. It's an idea that we would have one budget document that would come forward year after year. There would be less confusion. There would be more efficiencies. We would learn to do zero-based budgeting one way as a group, and we would work as a cohesive legislative body with our respective priorities in the House and the Senate, served by a group of people that are loyal to the House and the Senate, but to Georgians and putting Georgians first. So that's what Section 2.1, Part 2 of the bill does. It seeks to create the Joint Legislative Budget Office with the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House appointing the director of that office. The rest of the sections of the bill, Section 2.2 through the end of the bill, in Section 13 are cross-references where currently a House Budget Office and Senate Budget Office are alluded to in law, it just changes that and alludes to the Joint Legislative Budget Office. So again, ours is we will always have a good collegial debate with our colleagues across the hall about everything from coffee to donuts and you know who has the best resolutions. But in this case, this is not a debate. This is about creating a value for Georgians. We think we can save upwards of $1 million out of the gate, and by so doing, we learn to do zero-based budgeting in a single way, and bring even further value, more value to Georgians. Representative, that was my brief on part two, and appreciate you working with us here on the legislation to allow us to sort of complete the circle on zero-based budgeting. If you had something further you would like to add on how that affects your proposition.
No, sir, but after I know you had talked about a hearing only and possibly holding this for a vote for next week. If that would be the case, I'd like to get together with Chairman Hill, look into the two changes that he had recommended before final vote on this bill. I think that would be prudent in this case, if that would be acceptable to the chairman.
Go back to Section 1 if there were ones or questions of anyone on Section 2. We still have we're still going to take public comment testimony on the legislation if anybody wishes to do that. I know for those, I know we have some new folks in the legislature. You probably haven't seen it before, but when I was referring to the multiple different formats for the budget document, we can actually have that when we come in here before. I'm not going to pick which one's better. I'm not getting into that debate with our colleagues across the hall, but just having the two and having to look, you can't compare them. Having been a vice chair of appropriations, you can't even compare the numbers very easily from year to year, and it would just be better to work as a team, I feel like. Yes, sir. Just pull it towards you there, Representative. See your red light.
It says line 99, the committee shall contract with a licensed CPA or certified public accounting firm to conduct annually in accordance with accepted accounting principles of financial audit of legislative funds and expenditures, which I like the sound of that, but is the committee, who is the committee? And things like that.
Sure.
And I don't want to belabor us again, this is my very first committee meeting.
Absolutely, and I appreciate the question. What we have in those sections, the only change to current law that we're making there is where you see the strike through.
Okay, so this is current law.
Everything in Section 2.2 and on is current law. The only change is rather than referencing the House and Senate Budget Office, it references the Joint Budget Office. So that's what we're
Thank you for explaining that.
Yes, sir. I have to be honest, and we could ask our learned attorney. I think you're right in that case. I'm not familiar with exactly which section, but I believe the Legislative Services Committee is being spoken to in Section 2.2. Yeah. Are there any further questions of the author of the proposition? We have LC 140440S. Questions on Part 1 or Part 2 of the legislation?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Do we have any numbers on exactly, I know you mentioned a savings of approximately $1 million. Do we have any idea what it would cost to implement the program? Because I think it's the way to go. I just want to make sure we're not going to, we make sure that we're not spending more than we're saving.
Your question as to cost to implement zero-based budgeting.
Mm-hmm.
Representative, I know you've talked with Mr. Brown. Has he been able to give you any numbers?
Representative Shaw, I have talked to the director, John Brown, and in talking with him, he believes he can do it with the personnel he has currently, which I believe is himself and 9 or 10 analysts. The question comes down to how big of the portion of the budget does he have to look at every year in determining the workload. The one thing that I'm going to get together with Chairman Hill and Chairman Martin about which I will address right now, is we are considering one last change. Rather than looking at everything once every 4 years, it would be John Brown's recommendation that we change that to once every 6 years. That way we can do it with the personnel that we have on hand. We probably won't have to hire anybody else, and it would be a workload that not only would be acceptable for them, but would allow us to still get the level of service we want. So to answer your question, doing it in 4 years would be very tight on our budget staff, but doable. But probably doing it having a rotation once every 6 years would probably be the best thing with the current personnel without having to add personnel.
Okay. Thank you.
Further questions of the author of the proposition? Further questions? Yes, sir.
You might have already discussed this before, and excuse me for being a little tardy. Zero, traditionally, a budget starts when that committee comes to us, to the legislature, and they submit whatever they think they're going to use for that particular year. Now, zero-based budgeting, could you just kind of give me an idea of where does the budget start for that particular committee? Where does it? Where do you? I mean, do you use what they spent last year and use this year exactly how they're going to spend money? Exactly. Do I speak to the author there?
I'll let the author.
Could you give me? I'm a little new at this.
That's fine, Representative. The way that we do budgeting now is basically incremental budgeting, basically where we only look at increases or decreases over last year's budget. So if you look at your budget document, your tracking document, what you'll see an amount, and then you'll see the additions or reductions of that amount. That's pretty much all we look at. Zero base would look at each individual block budgeting unit. So if we were going to zero base the Department of Natural Resources, for instance, it would require the Department of Natural Resources to get together with the governor's budgeting office and break down every single block of where they spend their money. Not just we spent $100 million last year and this is how we're reducing it or this is how we're increasing it. It would actually get into the question of what are we spending the $100 million on. Mm-hmm. So it actually looks at that amount rather than just the additions or reductions.
Follow-up, please. Well, suppose that particular agency deletes a position, and for 6 months, no one is being paid for that position. What happens to that money? Do you automatically reduce?
I will let the chairman have that one.
We're going to budget some money for microphones. Representative, I think you have identified perhaps the need for zero-based budgeting, not on just the 6-month situation. What you have now is, let's just say that you and I have a department, and we have a budget last year, and that budget is $1 million for our department. We're working for the state, and in that we have 2 or 3 employees. If everything goes along and an employee ceases to work there, retires, and we don't ask for anything new, there's no change to our budget, and we would just get budgeted that $1 million again. And unless someone in the legislature knew that position went unfilled or asked if that position went unfilled, they would be budgeted the money for that position, and that money could be spent because we're program-based budgeting on any other sort of delivery. Am I speaking correct, Martha, when I say that? So it was budgeted originally for personnel. That person does not work there anymore, but if that money is in the budget, that money could be spent to deliver that service to the consumer, to Georgia. What you identified is an excellent point of why we want to go to zero-based budget, so that you actually see each year what's there. Many times there are programs that were funded years ago that are no longer in existence within a department, but unless a vice chair, unless someone in the House Budget Office finds that program and knows it's no longer operating, that money is still being budgeted, maybe being used by that department to deliver services to Georgia, but not what was originally legislative intent. Is that close to? If that absolutely is a great question. Without zero-based budgeting, we never get that money put back on the table to be evaluated and what is best use of it for Georgia taxpayers.
Real quickly, any of our neighboring states use it?
I know there are a lot of people talking about. Martha, can you give us just a quick address on that? Thank you. Coach.
Now, is it not true that before we start a budget, we must have a rainy day fund, a certain percentage stay in the budget? Is that not true? We must have set aside at X amount of money, a percentage, and what percentage is that? By law, 1%. Mm-hmm. Okay.
We're not going to budget any more money for microphone stands. We're just going to budget money for microphone. Further questions of the author of the bill? I think we've had several questions. I think the author wants to get with folks and work on it. If the committee doesn't have any further questions, I know we've had some. Yes, ma'am. Are you speaking to the microphone, Madam Chairman?
Okay, on page 4, line 129, it says the director of the Joint Legislative Budget Office. I thought the Georgia Constitution says that the House sets the budget. Are y'all doing away with the House?
No, what we intended to do is the House does start the budget and will continue to do so until a few years ago there was just a single budget office in the legislature. Now we have two, a Senate budget office and a House budget office. What we're suggesting is the staffs of those budget offices be combined so that we would have the synergy of all of those, quite frankly, those intelligent people that know the budgets, working together rather than each group individually. Inventing zero-based budgeting within their own office. So we'd like to develop that synergy. We think the money that would be saved in the combination of that, perhaps would be upwards of $1 million, which we may need to get this budget process started so that we can drive toward a zero-based budget, identify things that the representatives have brought forward today, and save the Georgia taxpayer, many times that over the years.
But the budget would still originate in the House.
Yes, ma'am. The Georgia Constitution, the budget will start in the House. We just would go back to the Joint Legislative Budget Office like we had up until just a few years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago.
Okay.
And what I mentioned in the introduction of that, Chairman Houston, was that one of the reasons that I asked the author to work with us and let us, entertain this in this measure was, as you well know, working on the budget, we have two different formats of the budget document every year. One year we use the Senate format, one year we use the House. I'm not going to advocate for which format is best, but we probably ought to we ought to pick one and stick with it. Would just be my personal opinion. We see it every year. We're down here. The budget people are familiar with both, but when the average Georgia citizen wants to come in and look at the budget, they shouldn't have to learn two different formats. I think they would expect us to do one. I doubt very seriously many people, when they do their house budget, do their budget for their home or their business, they use one format and even numbers years and a different format and odd. So we just want to do what makes sense.
Well, I appreciate the senator bringing
there.
this. He's been trying to do this for a long time, just a couple of years.
Okay. Any further questions? Further questions? If not, did we have anybody that wishes to speak to the proposition? If we'd invite you up, and if you could just identify yourself and.
Good afternoon. My name is Jim Nichols. I live in Stockbridge. I apologize if I look like I've been jumping between classes at GSU to come over here and then head back over there, but I have, and then I'll have to head out the door and get to class. I am here to speak in opposition to zero-based budgeting. I had the privilege of running for state senate last year and had the opportunity to discuss with constituents on the ground the true impacts. Support for zero-based budgeting is 3 miles wide and 2 inches deep. The reason being is every dollar counts in our budget. Right now we have a severe funding issue. We don't even have enough mic stands. That's true. But we are facing funding issues. In fact, the Atlanta Business News just had an article today saying judicial funding cuts hurt Georgia. We can think of tons of programs where funding cuts are hurting Georgia. So every dollar literally counts. President Carter brought zero-based budgeting up to D.C., and there's a reason why Ronald Reagan nixed the idea. I spoke with Dean Baker at the Center for Economic and Policy Research. He's an economist up in D.C., and he said it's the question of overhead and a question of efficiencies. Governor Perdue, in his reasoning for vetoing, said a survey of states finds that the states that currently maintain the methodology in their statute all have effectively abandoned the practice because of the additional bureaucratic processes and overhead while producing few identifiable results. In addition, the General Assembly could employ zero-based budgeting in its budget process under current law if it so chose. It goes on, while SB 1, which was the other bill from last year, is motivated by admirable goals, the realities of Georgia's and other states' experiences have demonstrated few results worth the overhead associated with this new process. Like I said, it's a question of funding. Every dollar counts. Moving even larger to the marginal value to our economy as a whole, Representative Barry Loudermilk had an op-ed the other day stating that Georgia needs to really increase its capacity for the high-tech sector. I really recommend everyone to read it because I agree with it. I spoke with an economist over at Georgia State, one of my professors, Bruce Seaman, and we discussed the issue of rent dissipation. Rent dissipation is an idea where when you increase the incentive for lobbying, for lawyers to come up, for accountants to start digging into fighting for every dollar of a bill, you are actually taking workers who could be doing more productive things outside of the economy and sending them to sit outside and talk to you guys and bug you guys. So literally that is down to a marginal value, but I am passionate about the fact that the cuts that we are doing right now are truly impacting people's lives. And for every single dollar that we are wasting, we are harming citizens in Georgia. If Ronald Reagan opposed it, Governor Perdue opposed it, states have not found any positive outcome because for every dollar you may save, you may be costing 3. We can't know. I'm not even aware if there's been any research on the true impacts of the cost. I've spoken to a number of people, and no one's really sure. I mean, I could be unaware of something, but I really passionately ask you to oppose this legislation because every dollar does count, and our state needs to start heading in the right direction. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for coming. Let me, if you don't mind, I appreciate you coming over, and if you're on a schedule to get back to class, maybe we can get together some other time. I absolutely understand. I think you've heard the committee talk about today the interest in, what's the real impact, can we do this? Let me give you an example, if I can, of why I think it is something that we can do, and I've said this as we entertain this bill and as we moved SB 1 last year. Zero-based budgeting, to some extent and to a large extent, is in the eye of that person that it just came out of his mouth. If it has, 10 people define it, they will use 11 different definitions. I think it's very important that we define it in the right manner. For instance, I used to do the corrections budget with my subcommittee. Clearly, when we start the budgeting process, we do not have to start at the level, do we need a prison? Okay, but equally clear, and I don't mean to be facetious, but I'm just trying to make a point at a real high level. It's clear we need to have prisons. What is equally also clear to me, however, is that within the Department of Corrections, we spend almost $1 billion a year to incarcerate adult males in the state of Georgia. And over the years, all I got, the 4 years I was down there, was when we had a budget change, there would be a plus number for additional money for health. Okay, I never saw did they spend what they were supposed to spend on heating and air, on water, on sewer. So I don't think we're out to look at the level of we want to see what everybody's electric bill was on a monthly basis. But, which I'm glad you came to talk to us. That's something we need to see as a committee. But it is absolutely important. We have PeopleSoft, I think, is correct, or do we use SAP, Martha? Which software? I'm sorry? We use PeopleSoft financial software here, and yet at times when I requested, how much does it cost to run Metro State Prison? How much? Just that one. Don't give all the stuff in the budget. I just want to know how much does it cost to run that prison, so I can divide that by the number of prisoner days. I couldn't get that information, or I wasn't given that information. Well, I'm here to tell you, used to be in the business, of financial services. If you have PeopleSoft, you can run your reports and tell me that. So in cases where departments, either choose to or in some cases choose not to be forthcoming with the data, this will help them do that. But you bring an excellent point, and I'm not asking you a question. I guess I'm making a statement. You bring an excellent point. We need to look at the value, but I think there's a happy place in there that we can find to see the value for people of Georgia without looking down at such a micro level that it would be cost disadvantageous. Okay. And hopefully, if you leave us your name and number, I'd love to keep you involved in the process.
Be more than happy to. Thanks for your time.
Anybody have a question? If the gentleman would yield for a question? Not hear one. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you for your time. Good luck with school. Is there anyone else? We had no one further to sign up for the bill. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to the proposition this afternoon? If not, if the committee does not object, what I would do is ask the author to get with Chairman Hill and work with him on the items that we discussed today. We'll have that back before the committee next week, more than likely at our regular scheduled meeting. At such time, since there may be significant changes, we would be open for public questions or comments on the new sections of the bill. We want to have an open and honest process as this goes forward, and appreciate Mr. Nichols coming forward. If there's no further business on this bill, we'll hold it over for action at our next meeting. Does anyone have any other information relative that they would like to bring before the committee? Let me ask the committee this. I have an opportunity to bring in a learned economist. I can't say that today. Economist. I have an economist too. To speak to us in the coming weeks. Would the committee be interested in hearing that, just as it relates to his theory on macro versus microeconomics and how that might affect the budget process? That'd be interested the committee. We'll do that. We'll have that out there. Any further business before the committee this afternoon? We have two other propositions that are in our committee that we will be looking to hear. I think one is House Resolution 11, and do you know the other House bill? I don't recall the other. Representative Parrott has another bill, so if you're interested in looking out there to matters that might come before the committee. House Bill 188 is also in the committee that when the authors get ready, we will hear those. If there's no further business for the committee this afternoon, we'll stand adjourned without objection. Without objection, we're adjourned.